Hi, everybody. Hi, welcome back. Welcome back. How are you, folks? Welcome. Our guests are here. They are here. Come on in. Yes. Hi, Emma.
Hi, Sophia.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Amazing. Thank you. Thank
Great.
you.
You look great.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. You too. Hi, everyone. Come on in the room. We're going to get started in a second. Yes.
Hello,
Hi, Saran. How are
I'm
you?
great. How are you?
Wonderful, wonderful. So good to meet you and connect.
Yes, it's good to meet you too.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming into the platform. We've been getting such great response from the workshops. It's been amazing. So we're ready for this third installment. I can't wait. I'm excited. But normally, how we always start, we do the introduction and we give our land acknowledgement. So I'll get started because folks are excited to be here. Canadian Women of Color Leadership Network is a nonprofit organization, a grassroots nonprofit organization that was established in 2018 in Canada's National Capital Region of Ottawa. We recognize that our office is located on the unceded and unsurrendered land of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We acknowledge and respect all First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people for their valuable past and present contributions to this land. We respectfully acknowledge and appreciate our presence on the Algonquin Anishinaabe ancestral lands, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to be present in the territory with you today. And we will continue to work in solidarity towards improving the lives of diverse people on this shared land and acknowledge the importance and commitment to decolonization towards working in partnerships with Indigenous communities. We are founded on the pillars of women in leadership, wellness, economic development, and community partnerships. CWCLN operates through a lens of intersectional feminist framework and post-colonialist framework in all of our objectives. Our aim is to see racialized women, two-spirit, trans, and non-binary femmes reflected in upper-level leadership and management positions in the workplace by providing the necessary skills, tools, and connections to mitigate systemic barriers. So, with that, I'm going to leave you guys to introduce yourselves and get started with the awesome conversation. I'll be back at the end, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank
Great. Thanks so much, Sophia. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Hi, Saran. Nice to
Hi.
see you. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here today. And I am going to just want to thank uh, everyone for coming. I just also want to thank the Canadian Women of Color Leadership Network and the team there, Sophia, Delia, and Raquel, for all their support in this series. My name is Emma Louie. I'm the Holistic Health Director for the Canadian Women of Color Leadership Network. My pronouns are she and her. I'm joining from Gatineau on unceded, surrendered Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. As Sophia mentioned, this is the third session of our Burnout and Holistic Health series. Today we're gonna be talking. The talk is called "Addressing Burnout with Food and Nutrition," and our guest is Saran James Vaughn, who I'll introduce more in depth in a few minutes. I just want to take a few minutes to introduce myself, why we created this series, and then I'll pass it to Saran, who will introduce herself, and then I'll give an overview of burnout, um, and then I'll ask some questions to Saran to draw on her knowledge and wisdom, and then we can pass it to the audience for any questions that you all have. So just to start, I'm Toisanese and Cantonese. I was born and raised in Ottawa, which is also on unceded Anishinaabe territory. I worked in social justice for more than 12 years, mostly in water justice, as well as research in healthcare, climate, and other issues. I'm currently a member of Biblioterre, which is a land-based co-op near Wakefield, not far from where I am now, and I'm currently an editor for Rabble. I shifted to working in holistic health a few years ago. I offer holistic nutrition, biodynamic craniosacral therapy, and theta healing, which is focused on core beliefs. I work in the region. I work with people in care work. So that's folks who are frontline workers, caregivers, activists, and people in community work or social justice. And I was really seeing a gap between these two worlds, the need for healing, as many of us work in our communities, and then the need to bring a social justice lens to health and wellness spaces. And a lot of my work is trying to bring these two worlds together. I work with people to support their health, whether that's gut issues, pain, anxiety, depression, and so forth. And then I also make links to some of the bigger systems, which we're going to talk about, such as racism, white supremacy, capitalism, colonization, and patriarchy, and then how these sit in our bodies. I also make connections to intergenerational trauma, what happened to our family lines and to our ancestors, and how this impacts our health. So I want to talk a little bit about why we created this series. I hear many people talk about being burnt out, and you probably are experiencing that too, Saran, in your work. Folks who are joining probably experiencing burnout as well. So I wanted to host a series that tied the very real need to address. Yeah, I see a heart in the chat. Thanks, Celestial. Just wanted to host a series that tied the real need to address burnout and then tie it to some of these bigger social justice issues that I mentioned. And there's just a lot that we're facing now: a global pandemic, mental health crises, gender-based violence, climate anxiety, ongoing colonization, racism, and so forth. And then many of us are experiencing burnout. So we wanted to create a series where we could talk about these issues and how do we recover from burnout with so much going on, and then how do we reconnect to health and foster hope in these times. So for folks who are just joining, I'm joined by Saran James Vaughn today, who is a holistic nutritionist. I'm going to read Saran's bio, and then I'll pass it to you, to Saran, to talk more about your work. So Saran is the founder of Wellness by Saran, a full-service holistic wellness education platform dedicated to menstrual health and a decolonized approach to well-being. Saran is also a cultural curator and advocate, creating safe learning spaces for Afro-diasporic people at the intersection of wellness and culture. So Saran, I'm going to pass it to you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I was listening to how you introduced yourself, and I was like, oh, all of those things, all of them, all of them. I can relate to much of the intersectionality of your work is very similar to mine. So I'm very, very grateful to participate and, share a bit of my experience and my knowledge with everyone here today. Thank you for the introduction. I would add that I am a daughter of the Caribbean. So I was born in Jamaica and, spent my formative years there. I moved to Canada when I was 18, 19 years old, exploring a whole new frontier. And my dad is from St. Vincent, so again, a lot of my work is rooted in my Caribbean experience, my Jamaican experience, and that holistic approach that I take is rooted in a lot of that traditional wisdom that was passed on to me through my family line. I try to incorporate as much of that as possible into the work that I do. Because I think that in order to really decolonize our approach to wellness, we have to root into some of our traditions that actually work for us. So, as you mentioned, my work is focused on menstrual health, but I typically work looking at well-being as a whole and how does culture and identity intersect with that? And I've found that living in Canada for all these many years now, um, it holds true that, there is so much wisdom that we sometimes ignore from the things that we learned from our ancestors or people in our families that can actually help to build the resilience that we need to thrive in this time, right? So very, very happy to share today and looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you, Saran. I would just say Sophia is saying Vinci fan in the chat. So
Yes, the
thank you,
in
Sophia.
building.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Okay, well, so I'm welcoming folks who are just joining now. Thanks so much for joining our conversation about burnout, food, and nutrition. I'm going to talk a bit about burnout, what it is, different symptoms and causes, and then we're going to have a discussion with Saran some more. My interest in burnout was like I burned out. I've had several bouts of burnout. At times I'd work hours on end without taking breaks, working into the night, eating on the go, and generally prioritizing work and so many other things other than myself. I experience many of the burnout symptoms that I'm going to talk about, including compassion fatigue, which I think is common for folks who work in all kinds of care work, social justice, like the work that you do too, Saran. And then caregivers, even people who aren't in care work, like paid work, but just are caregiving for family members or whatnot. And then also experience some major digestive issues, lots of food sensitivities. It's how I got into holistic nutrition. So over the years, I've developed better habits, and then I started doing a lot of digging into the roots of burnout, like why was I burning out, and then still am undoing some of the deeper issues that are linked to burnout, which we're going to talk about today. And in this series, we have one more after today next week. Uh, so people experience burnout in different ways, but it's a lot to do with being exhausted in all levels, like whether that's mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual. And it often stems from being in fight, flight, or freeze. So fight, flight, or freeze are the states that our nervous systems go into when there's a threat, whether that's real or perceived. Our bodies go into these states to protect ourselves, but they can tax our bodies over time and can result in burnout. So this is when our body goes into the sympathetic nervous system. So symptoms include increased heart rate. Our adrenal glands pump out cortisol and other stress hormones. And cortisol can lead to inflammation in the body. Chronic inflammation can then lead to different kinds of illness. Our digestion slows. Over time, people can develop food intolerances or allergies, or IBS is so common these days, irritable bowel syndrome, muscle tension that can affect our circulation, and just so many things like anxiety, depression, headaches, waking up exhausted, even if people are sleeping well, or sometimes the reverse happens, being wired and not being able to sleep, having insomnia. Pain, compassion fatigue, I mentioned. And so I want to shift to like what are some of the factors that contribute to burnout. This can be chronic stress, overwork. What we eat can impact burnout as well. If we are constantly having stimulants such as caffeine or refined sugars, refined foods, and then food sensitivities or allergies. So there can be a cyclical relationship that these can be caused by stress, but they can also tax our body more as well. And then there are some of the bigger issues like trauma or PTSD or complex PTSD, whether that's intergenerational trauma or collective trauma. These traumatic experiences put our bodies into fight, flight, or freeze, which I talked about. And then people who face systemic barriers, Black, Indigenous, or people of color, queer communities, people with disabilities, especially through the pandemic, we've seen that. And then also the reality of racism, anti-Black, anti-Indigenous, anti-Asian racism. So not feeling safe in our communities can have a huge impact on our nervous system and putting us in a constant state of flight or flight. Intergenerational trauma that I mentioned, which is trauma experienced by our ancestors if they experienced war or famine, violence against gender-based violence can also impact our nervous system. And then the collective trauma that we see, COVID is one very salient example, and then also the climate crisis as well. And then I think it's important to talk about the economic system which causes or feeds burnout, capitalism. We're taught that our worth is tied to productivity, that rest is lazy. Many of us feel guilty for resting, and only things or work that have money attached to them have value. So being a parent or being in care work or doing art or rest or healing isn't of value. And then our economic system is also really tied to hyper individualism. So when we burn out, so the idea that we have to do everything alone, and then when we burn out, it's our fault and we also have to heal alone. So it's just so important to talk about community and community care. And I know that's something that's important to you as well, Saran. So I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on that. And then also the extractive nature of capitalism is really prevalent in our communities. The way we subconsciously believe that our bodies are limitless or indispensable resources, that our bodies, especially Black and brown bodies and the earth, are treated that way. So some of the work that I do is addressing these bigger systems, and I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, Saran, because I know that's an approach that you take as well. So I'd like to shift to some of your work and ask you if there's anything that you want to add to the symptoms or causes of burnout that I talked about, and then what does burnout look like for someone's menstrual cycle as well, because I know that's an area that you
Mm-hmm.
focus on.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so we have a lot of stillness in our environment now. I think we use technology quite a bit, and that is something else that really drives burnout um, on many levels. So you're constantly inundated with news that might be stressful to process, and it's kind of hard to turn it off. And then the actual physical stress of exposure to blue light, and the disruption of circadian rhythms. So I think technology use is a big driver of stress, in addition to the things that you mentioned. And I love that you touched on, this idea that that is rooted in capitalism, right? And productivity and the way that we view rest. And oftentimes, if we think about it from an intergenerational perspective and cultural perspective, sometimes, that resting, it was not a thing. It was not, it really was perceived as being lazy if you rested. Uh, I remember my mom telling me when she was young, her grandmother would say the devil would find work for idle hands. So whenever, she was playing, or, she and her sisters, it was like, you can't really spend your time idly when you do need that time to dream and to wonder and to, imagine, especially as a child. So a lot of us are coming from cultures where that is not inherently part of it. And I mean, it goes really way back. So we have these held beliefs around productivity and rest that are deeply rooted in a very colonial perspective and capitalist perspective, right? So, for us, Black bodies or Afro diasporic people, we know that is our productivity was deeply important on plantation systems. Rest, again, was not a priority. Survival was, and making sure that your body and your family is safe. So we have a lot of work to do around redeveloping a mindset around rest, and it takes time to unlearn, right? Uh, Burnout, which is part of the reason why when I think about my work with women and menstruating people, I'm offering a perspective on the way that we imagine ourselves showing up in the world. And having that cycle as a blueprint of knowing when to rest and when to work, and using our energy in more efficient ways. So the menstrual cycle is very sensitive to stress, okay? And a lot of women and menstruating people experience burnout because there isn't that alignment happening with your natural energy rhythms. We are very tied to um, a patriarchal, capitalist version of what that energy, how we should use our energy. So specifically, we have a 28 to 30 day cycle, and our energy changes all throughout that time. So, day one is going to they look different from day 28, right? Whereas men who have a testosterone cycle, which is 24 hours, have a very more consistent energy, right? So um, their energy is a bit easier to measure, whereas we are shifting a little bit every single day, right? The concentration of estrogen shifts throughout the cycle. The concentration of progesterone shifts throughout the cycle. And these really do impact our energy levels and so many other things. So I encourage women and menstruating people to work with, to view themselves from the perspective of having a cyclical body, right? And cyclical energy levels. So what it looks like when we go against that, right? We've learned to fit into the 24-hour testosterone cycle to our detriment much of the time. And it looks like increased occurrence of insulin resistance and diabetes, because those chronic cortisol levels are happening. And then we're seeing a lot of dysregulation in the menstrual cycle itself, because as I mentioned, very sensitive to stress. The cycle is I think it's so beautiful because your body is picking up, your autonomic nervous system picking up signals from your environment as to whether or not it's safe. So as you mentioned, whether it's real or perceived threat, your body's going to go into that fight or flight. You're going to trigger your sympathetic nervous system, so when that happens, we know digestion shuts down, right? We know that reproduction shuts down. We know that your immune system shuts down. And then you're in this place of wondering, oh, I'm having PMS. I'm having more migraines, etc. And like, why is this happening? You're still feeling or experiencing your body telling you. It's a signal. So your menstrual cycle is a signal like, hey, something's off in your environment. And the biggest challenge is often taking care of those bigger systems, right? So we intellectually know these things. I can explain it to folks in a workshop or with my clients. But if they have these systemic barriers that make it very challenging to make a shift in their stress levels, they gotta work, they have kids or, bills to pay, etc. Working night shifts, whatever it is. How can we create systems that support the well-being of the individuals, right? So these are some of the things I often too, just like yourself, try to problem solve around, because sometimes it's not enough to say, okay, well, you're gonna eat at this time, and you're gonna make sure you're not skipping meals, but the mechanism is not in place to support those habits being formed.
Mm, yeah. Thank you so much for all of that. There's so many like good nuggets of information, and so much of that resonates. I saw a comment from Celestial Being saying, thank you for this reminder of the cyclical changes. I think sometimes because we live in a capitalist society, like you were saying, we expect our bodies to operate on the same level all the time. And then we don't take into consideration, the times where we do need to rest and the times where we will have more energy and to work with those cycles. And it really resonates what you were saying earlier about rest, and for Black people or other folks who have experienced slavery. That's the intergenerational trauma. That's like it wasn't safe to rest. And I think for some folks, like they, working through that does take a long time. And I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because we as like holistic health practitioners, we say, you need to rest, which is important, but then we also need to recognize that there are sometimes deeper layers of why people aren't resting. And so to have like really holistic health, we need to take these bigger reasons and these intergenerational reasons of why people aren't resting.
That's
So, yeah. I'm 100% with you in the need to like address, these bigger issues and to have these systems in place to support people. And then, and meanwhile, both you and I work with food and nutrition. Do you have tips like as you're, and I think it's like a multi-pronged approach, right? Like we need to address these bigger systems and do things in our day-to-day life that
absolutely,
support us.
absolutely.
Yeah. So, do you have tips on how food and nutrition can help folks with burnout and support them in their day to day?
Absolutely. Okay, so the first, so I mentioned before that when you're in fight or flight, your digestion goes offline. So oftentimes, in combination with other therapies to help um, put you in a state of rest and digest, there are things that you can do um, to support optimal digestion, because I often start there, right? Uh, so um, taking a digestive enzyme, for example, if you're noticing that you're experiencing indigestion, heartburn, things like that, you are not necessarily producing the gastric juices that you need to break your food down if you're in fight or flight. Okay, you actually need to be in a rest mode to digest food well. So I like to start with digestion, because if your digestion is off, you're not going to absorb the nutrients that you need um, to support your optimal body function. And then there's certain nutrients that are really important if you experience high stress. So for example, vitamin C is often depleted um, during high periods of stress. So you want to make sure that you're having more of that. And that might look like um, incorporating more, even something as simple. I try to think about it from like the simple, what is the easiest thing that you can do, right? But even lemon water, starting your day off with that, it helps with digestion as well. But starting with lemon water in the morning, or adding it to your water bottle throughout the day. Um, you can supplement, of course, if that feels easier for you. Some people are like, it's hard to get to that place where you're getting all of your nutrients from food. We know that it's challenging because soil depletion and all of these things. So supplementing in periods of high stress may be beneficial. Vitamin C supports the adrenal glands. Um, so does vitamin B6. So make sure that you are um, having those healthy grains, healthy whole grains that are rich in B vitamins. Um, the other thing I want to really mention in terms of blood sugar regulation is protein. Protein is really, really important. And there's a magic number, the clock number of 10 a.m. So at least starting your day, um, having some protein by at least 10 a.m., right? This again is going to help with the regulation of blood sugar levels. So a lot of times, especially if you are uh, I feel like folks don't necessarily eat well in terms of like there's a lot of skipping of meals and there's a lot of like blood sugar roller coasters happening. So maybe eating like fairly early in the evening and then not eating again until way in the afternoon the next day. That can actually send stress signals, right? So your body doesn't necessarily know the difference between like, oh, I have this like huge project at work or like um, dysregulated blood sugar levels. Your body processes stress in the very same way. You're gonna still have those the high cortisol levels, etc. So I would say like having protein, your B vitamins, vitamin C, again, because it supports the adrenal glands and it is often depleted in high stress periods. Those are some really critical nutrients. And as I mentioned, supporting digestion so that you're reducing inflammation overall in the body because some people with stress comes pain, right? Things like fibromyalgia and other disorders can really flare up because there's elevated inflammation levels due to chronic stress and chronic fatigue.
Mm, thank you. This is such like helpful and practical tips that folks can implement. And I think so like B vitamins, whole grains, folks who are just joining, vitamin C, we're just talking about burnout and food and nutrition. So some really practical things. So thank you for that. I want to shift a little bit to you've brought it up in the conversation. You're getting some hearts. So thanks for that info. Um, so you've raised, we've talked about your approach to wellness. You take a decolonized approach to well-being. I wonder if you can go into that a little bit more detail and explain that a little bit as well. And Luna, I see your comment in as well, and we'll definitely uh, we'll definitely touch on that in a second. Saran,
Yeah, okay.
did you want to?
Sorry, do you want to repeat your question? I wasn't sure if you were.
Sure. Yeah. Actually, yeah. Why don't we go to Luna's
Yeah,
comment? So Luna is saying, I have reoccurring nightmares and often wake up depleted and hungry. I started eating small snacks before bed to help regulate blood sugar levels in the morning when I wake up.
yeah,
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Luna.
yes. And do you find it helpful with the nightmares? Do you find that you're experiencing that less? Oftentimes, waking up in the middle of the night is an indication of high stress levels, um, higher cortisol, and dysregulated blood sugar. So, sometimes that small snack before bed can be helpful. Um, but it sounds very archaic, archaic, but like, I do like the idea of having three meals. So with protein meal in the morning, protein with each meal, but really making sure that you're having a good space so that you're not on a roller coaster, you're on a wave. And it makes a huge difference. So definitely I sleep better, yes.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I like that wave, not roller coaster.
Yes.
I think that's Luna saying, I've been able to reduce waking up in the middle of the night, exhausted and hungry, looking for food. Okay, awesome. And I think key to that, Luna, and others who are joining is like listening to your body. There's a lot of I mean, people's bodies are so different, and there's a lot of like ideas around, you know, like how much we should eat, and like different, there's intermittent fasting, and like like that works for some people, but I hear what you're saying, Saran, and that like when, you know, when folks are waking up in the middle of the night and hungry, then it's indication of stress, and you don't actually want to go long periods without eating then, and that protein is just so very important. And then, yeah, Luna's saying it's now routine for me if I'm experiencing stress throughout the day. Good. Yeah. I think it's like developing those habits that we need to get us through stressful times,
Mm-hmm.
and really listening to our bodies.
Yeah. Okay, so your question was the decolonized approach, what that looks like, right?
Yes.
Um, so it's so interesting. There's two parts to it. So living in Canada, I've had to, when I first moved here, I could not understand the concept of why it would get so cold after being so nice and warm. Like it, there's all these cycles, and I've learned to appreciate the beauty of the changing seasons. Um, but that comes with, every season comes with its own sort of beauty. So in the winter, you don't really grow anything. But I started to learn about traditional and indigenous practices around food preservation, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the types of foods that were most consumed in the winter months. So fish, where would indigenous communities get their vitamin D from if you weren't getting a whole lot of sun exposure? And there's an increased intake of fish, and whale blubber. All these things have very, very, very high vitamin D content. So how can we incorporate a lot of the wisdom from the land and indigenous people where we live? And that's part of what we do when we do that land acknowledgement, right? We promise to respect the traditions. And so part of the traditions is eating seasonally, right? And learning the ways of preserving food, canning. I remember just being fascinated by this practice. A friend of mine who homesteads, she in the summertime will get like huge, but like baskets of peaches, and she would can so many peaches, and she would grow her food and preserve it and freeze dry and things like that. And so that would keep her throughout the winter time. So how can we use all of these foods? How can we eat more root vegetables in the fall, and create recipes that allow us to connect more deeply with the cycles of nature? So that's the first part, right? So eating seasonally, in the spring, you're having the young shoots and the bitter greens, the dandelion greens, all of that. In the summer, you're keeping it light, and there's such an abundance, right? Your body is really primed to take in a lot of those really fresh fruits and vegetables. Uh, but then I look at it also from the perspective of my culture and how eating cultural foods, yes, I know I'm in Canada, so, but like I can get a lot of it. Um, how eating foods that are uh, feel like home to me can actually make me feel at home, right? And the health benefits, and really understanding that some of these foods that were villainized actually have a lot of health benefits and are the antidote to the sad diet, right? You know, the diet that is high in sugar and like processed foods and things like that. We eat so simply much of the time. And so I love to incorporate still a lot of my Caribbean foods. And I feel so nourished when I do that. Nourished in a physical sense, but also energetically, and spiritually. And so oftentimes, when we move to a different country, me in this case, when I first came here as a teen, I was like, oh my gosh, like I never ate some of the foods here before, right? And I went crazy. just just trying like all of these things, bacon and pancakes and like just all of it. And but my body was not really loving it, responding to it, because that wasn't part of my everyday. But whenever I nourish myself with foods from the Caribbean, I feel totally different. So I often encourage folks, if they're not really sure, um, to go back to their traditions. The other thing too with Caribbean cooking in particular is that we're very resourceful. We had to be. And so there's some folks that will make fun of, oh, like you just use like random parts of meats and all kinds of stuff. But there's a reason to that. In fact, we didn't necessarily have a lot of meat in our diets. Like it was always sort of like to enhance a dish. So if you're having callaloo, for example, or greens, you might put a little bit of saltfish in, um, just to add something to it. I encourage folks, especially if there's blood pressure issues and stuff. If you can use fresh cod. We're not in plantation times where there was a reason for using the salted, the preserved meats. But you can, still incorporate those foods. It's so important. The root vegetables that are high in fiber, that helps to regulate your blood sugar levels. Fiber prevents those blood sugar spikes that can happen when you have simple sugars in your diet. So including those will help with energy. So if you think about our ancestors, they used to uh, have to go and work in the fields for extended periods of time, and they needed energy to sustain that work. So they used these foods that grew in the earth, not just for energy sustaining, but for grounding as well. So root vegetables are very grounding. Um, so these are some of the ways that we can decolonize the way that we think about food, um, from a cultural perspective, and just from the perspective of nature, and considering the place that we live.
Mm. Yeah, I love all that. What especially resonates with me is what you were saying about eating like our cultural foods and like eating foods that our ancestors did. And like that really resonates with me. And there's, food is healing in so many ways, like when you get the nutrients that you need. But I think there's an added level when we eat like our ancestors' food and what foods that came down our family lines is like particularly healing. So I'm really glad that you raised that. And related to that is herbs. And I know we've had a conversation about herbs in the last two sessions, and I know that you work with herbs. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about your work on herbs.
Absolutely. I should have mentioned that many herbs actually have high vitamin content as well. So it's a really great idea to incorporate them. You can Some foods are nutritive, meaning that you take them large in a large volume to get that substantive nutrient infusion. And then the medicinal nature of herbs can actually shift the physiology of the body into one that is supports healing. uh, I love using herbs for stress and burnout and sleep.
Mm.
I think that they really help to create an alignment that puts you in a position to be receptive to the other changes that you need to make um, to heal well, right? So similar to food, and that decolonized approach to meals, I actually had to learn about the herbs that grow here. So I have a lot of that traditional wisdom from my own family and what to use. and there is this understanding that what you need actually grows where you live. So in my family home in Jamaica, for example, there's a lot of different herbs that my great grandmother used for supporting my mom and my grandmother's health. So it was a joy to explore the range of herbs that grow in this part of the world. Again, tapping into that indigenous wisdom. Some of my favorites, and one I will just kind of highlight that I'm working with now because I'm a little bit obsessed with sleep and circadian rhythms, and uh, doing a bit of research and experimenting on myself.
Mm.
And so I've been working with skullcap most recently, and it is a herb that is really spectacular for HPA axis dysfunction. Right, it works particularly on the nervous system and encourages deep and restful sleep. So there are certain herbs work differently than pharmaceutical drugs. We're not stopping certain processes from happening. It's more supportive. And so I encourage folks to start a foundational relationship with herbs through just tea as a meditation, right?
Mm.
So let me think about one. I'll use sorrel because again, the time of the year, and it's reminiscent of home, and it is beautiful for the cyclical body, and it's high in vitamin C. So it's we call it sorrel. It's in the hibiscus family, but even creating ceremony around that, that particular herb is can be so healing, right? So it warms the body, it opens up the heart chakra, it connects you to the to your womb space, and it gives you a really strong infusion of that vitamin C that you need to support your adrenal glands as you move through periods of stress. So uh, there is it's hard to you need like a whole like many sessions to talk about herbs. Our herbalist said to me it takes like 7 lifetimes to know like the full extent of all the herbal knowledge that there is. But you can start really simply by exploring um, one or two herbs and just noticing how it impacts your body. And then like you can do a little deep diving into the pharmacology of it. I like to experience it first and then kind of do the nerdy stuff after, um, just to kind of see how it impacts my particular body because everyone is different, right? Everybody responds differently. So that's my small, tiny take on a very large topic.
Huge topic, huge topic. I'm learning about herbs too, and I think I read somewhere that like they're like documented there's like 70,000 herbs that have been used, and like there's just so much like knowledge around that. And I really like what you're saying about experimenting and seeing how you feel, and you do the nerdy stuff after. I love that. And then I kind of do it all together. I've developed a routine of at nighttime I'll have a herbal tea, and I will drink it. And I think that self-awareness of like how it feels in your body is really important. Again, it's like bringing back to body awareness, and then I'll read about it at the same time. And it is kind of like a meditative process. It's like been a really healing practice in my day at the end of the day. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I might open it up for questions. If there are any questions in the audience, feel free to type it in the chat, and then Saran can share her wisdom. And while folks are thinking of questions, I might ask you. You know, we talked about body awareness. Like you bring that back a lot in your talk about like how you feel through the month, through the cycles, how different things like herbs land in your body, and I like connection to. to our body is my body is an ongoing process for me. I have clients who aren't connected to their bodies. Like that's a ongoing process for me, as I mentioned. And you likely have folks who are also, like learning to reconnect to their bodies. And it seems like quite common. And do you have thoughts on why folks are so disconnected to their bodies now?
Yes, it's a disconnection from nature, you know. We are a reflection of nature. So to be disconnected from the body is to be disconnected from the natural world. And it's almost as if there is this superimposed or artificial way of being that is layered on top of what is natural. And so we've been taught to villainize ourselves, the world.
Mm.
Everything is has this sort of artificial feel to it, and so that really leads to that disconnection and actually inherent mistrust. You know, we've outsourced a lot of our awareness. We've outsourced a lot of our understanding of who we are to everyone else. You know, so whenever something is wrong, we are imbalanced. We are seeking answers outside of ourselves uh, because we're taught that we shouldn't trust ourselves. We're taught that we don't have our own inner wisdom that can guide us. We're taught not to trust nature because she's not predictable in many ways. In some ways, nature can be with the seasons and things like that, but in other ways, it's not. You know, nature is not. Um, we are also taught to think of ourselves as separate, as on a different level from all other living things, right? We don't think of ourselves as part of an ecosystem. We're somehow sort of like outside of that, and like we are the only species that works in that way. Everything else in nature works in tandem, um, and ecosystems thrive when all organisms are working together. And so that is part of the reason why we have a challenging relationship with our own bodies. Um, and I think that when you start to experience the natural world as existing alongside us and there to support us, so even thinking about plants as wisdom carriers that can, you know, give us uh, that as well, um, then we can start to trust. Oh, okay, this is what my body responds to. This, I know that if I eat this particular thing, I'm not going to feel great. You know, I know that on day 21 of my cycle, I'm probably going to feel this, or I have a tendency towards that. It's that acceptance of and not associating like anxiety or judgment to it, but just understanding, and that self-awareness is so important. So uh, there is work to do in re-establishing that connection, and connecting with nature and observing the natural world can really, really help because we're just a microcosm, right? We have bacteria and all kinds of things within our body ecosystems, just like the natural world. I think that can really be a helpful blueprint if you want to tap into that self awareness a bit more deeply.
Mm. Yeah, that's so beautiful. I think that we talk about the multi-pronged approach, and we talk about systems that support people. I think this is part of this creating of these systems is like finding small ways to reconnect to our outer world. and seeing, it is so ingrained in our language that we think that we're separate from nature. We talk about like connecting to nature as if it was something, that is separate from us. And so really that reconnection, I think, is so very important. I want to thank you so much for today. I'm so happy that we had an opportunity to talk and to learn from all the amazing work that you do. For folks who are in the audience, if they want to work with you, or folks who are going to watch this later, if they want to work with you, how can they do that? How can they get a hold of you?
Yes, so if you're following, I'm hoping that you will all follow on Instagram. But if you go to the link in my bio, there's tons of resources and freebies and links to my calendar, the website. If you want to book some time, I do free consultations just to, lay the foundation. Like I said, tons of resources and freebies on my website. Lots of resources for you to explore. So.
Okay, and then your website is Wellness by Saran.
Yes, so my website
Okay.
is www.wellnessbysaran.com. Again, if you're interested in working one-on-one, I have a whole one-on-one page, and all of my offerings are there. Group coaching as well. All of my offerings are on my website.
Okay. And then Instagram, your handle is wellness.
_by_Saran.
Okay, awesome. Wonderful. And for folks who are interested in working with me on burnout as well, I offer a 6 to 12 week program. And I will also be doing a healing circle in winter about beliefs that we have internalized from some of these bigger systems that we talked about. So Saran will also just include your info in the comments on this recording. It's going to be posted. But I thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm sure the folks watching really did too. There's Celestial Bean is saying music to my ears, and thank you for your reflections, Saran. So we all
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much.
Guys, this was amazing. And Saran, the entire time you were talking about food and you mentioned sorrel. I know sorrel drink. We drink that drink and we have it in bread and we have it in cake. And then when you were talking about food, I was thinking about pilau and chicken back, the parts of the foods that other people may not eat. We have it in our foods. And these are the foods that make us feel whole and make us feel, together as family. What people know as soul food, that is our soul food. And
Yeah.
so when you're talking about that, we are Vinci too. So when I said Vinci fam, you're fam already, because I said, wait a second, you're fam from St. Vincent. We
Yeah.
are too. And so all of the foods that you were talking about is just home. It's home to us and home to my tummy and home to my healing, right? Like it's part of my heart. So you had me there when you were talking about all the foods. I was thinking about, oh my God, I'm hungry right now. I could go for some pillow. But I want to thank you so much for coming in and bringing all your knowledge, your flavorful knowledge about herbs and about healing and menstrual health. We have to have you back and to have a conversation about reproductive health
Yes, for sure.
and what it means to Black and racialized women, because it's a whole different concept and it's a whole different thing. I would be sharing my own story and my own journey with that as well, when we do have you back on that. And all of our guests so far have just been phenomenal. I want to thank you all for coming into the series. Emma, it's an amazing series, and we'll be back again next week, guys, with another installment, our final and fourth workshop on the holistic health burnout. It's been a journey, but it's been such a journey of learning with the book recommendations and with the workshops that each individual person is running with their gardens and what we've been learning. We've just learned so much, guys. So I really want to thank you again for coming in. I want to make sure everybody has a very prayerful week, a healing week, and a great journey as we go through this season. And we'll see everybody back again next week. Reminders to follow us here on IG, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And we will see everybody back again next week. Thanks so much, guys, for joining. Much
Thank you.
appreciated. Have a great one.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.